Yeah.
Let's
Were you
have
using
3
my
in
camera?
front, 3 in the next one.
Okay. We're using my camera, right?
Yeah.
My phone.
Get along there. Yes, I got the light. Yeah. That's why I was thinking that corner. Thank you, everybody. Monkey suits and all. No,
Ready, Sally?
he was
Yep.
discussing the apparel.
It's 5, a little after 5:15. We'll call this regular meeting to order. Will you please stand and recite the pledge with me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Then I'd like to also welcome the people in the audience this evening, too. Moving to B, our board norms. I will read those tonight. Board norms are: discussion will be based on the board's strategic plan, its mission, and what's best for students. The board will act as stewards of tax dollars. Board members will complete foundation work to be prepared for meetings. Meetings will be efficient. All perspectives will be voiced and heard, and all members will maintain a professional decorum. Moving to public communications, we have none. Is there any conflicts of interest to declare? Hearing none, moving to consent agenda. Motion to approve. Motion by Brenda. Seconded by Cedric. Any discussion? Hearing none, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving into our regular agenda, we have nothing under recognition or correspondence. Under reports, we have superintendent's report. Rob?
Okay, thank you. You'll notice the written report that I do have already. Just a few notes. The advanced ed review, as I mentioned in a previous report, asking that on our next meeting on the 16th, that those that can come at 4:30. Part of the advanced ed review process includes governance. So there'll be some interviews with our advanced ed review team at that time. And then I've also pointed out that 2 o'clock, if you're able to make it, it's really a tough time. On the 18th, usually it would be later in the day than 2 o'clock, but they are fighting to make flights. So 2 o'clock on the 18th, if you're able to attend, that's the exit review. Now that's an optional. I mean, the exit review in general is optional. You don't have to have that, but we like to have it. Opportunity for anybody that would like to hear about what the advanced ed team found, their findings, that they could come and hear those from the advanced ed review team instead of just from us. Of course, we'll communicate them out, but if for those interested people, media would like to come, that's the 18th at 2 o'clock. To hear that advanced ed review team. The process takes usually no more than an hour. The superintendent evaluation, you are required, just as a reminder, that's now by November 15th, that has to be completed. I suggested a schedule that you can follow if you so choose, but I don't think we need to talk about that anymore. But just know that you're really targeting the November 6th meeting, unless you want to have a special meeting to approve that, because it does have to be approved prior to the 15th. Board education this month, or this meeting, we have two. One is ESG, and Mr. Suito will be up here momentarily to provide some information on that. I'll be sharing information related to open meeting, open record laws. You know, a lot of times the narratives are a lot more valuable for board education in the case studies than just hearing a presentation on open meeting, open records. So what I opted to do was find some Attorney General opinions that revolve around open meeting, open records. Really, you know, when you look through them, Mr. Hout and I were having this conversation before the meeting. Really, when you look through them, it's oftentimes not egregious things that have happened that result in open meeting, open record violations. They're generally very honest mistakes, or I didn't know. And that's why we do board education. We want to make sure that as you know, because open meeting and open records are so clearly defined in statute, you want to make sure that it's something that you're following explicitly. And I thought these three case studies kind of gave us, or these three opinions kind of gave us nice case studies in terms of what open meeting, open records. Like I said, generally, they aren't egregious and they aren't purposeful. They're mistakes and they're fixable, and they're things that it's just a part of process. So we'll go through those in board education. Another item that came up through some discussions internally was open enrollments and tuition agreements. We provide a lot of information on open enrollments and tuition agreements, and we approve them frequently. And I thought it might be valuable, while it's not necessarily board education, it's just a part of my report, but I thought it'd be valuable to go through and understand tuition agreements and open enrollments. I provided some pretty detailed information in my report. But generally, if somebody wants to attend a school district that's not their resident school district, they would have one of two forms to complete. One would be the tuition agreement, and one would be an open enrollment. Now, they're very similar, but there's differences between the two. Tuition agreement is annual. It's for 1 year. It's for that school year. An open enrollment would be perpetual. You don't have to complete an open enrollment every year. You complete an open enrollment once for that school district. There's some deadlines, but essentially you do an open enrollment. If you meet all the deadlines for that, you never have to do anything again unless you change districts. And that does happen pretty frequently. And one of the things, and I think you've probably noticed this as board members, as we've started to put those tuition agreements in, I know in the past they've been referenced. We have X amount of tuition agreements, this school to this school. one of the reasons why we think it's important to put names in is so you can see. You know, sometimes people move from district to district. And if they are residents of Jamestown, every time a district of a change is made in terms of school, we have to complete that whole process again. So if a family lives in Jamestown and chooses, as a kindergarten student, for example, to educate in Montpelier, we would need to do a tuition agreement and then an open enrollment form. If they were to move in the second grade to Medina, we would go through that process again. And we would fill out a tuition agreement and an open enrollment form. Say in the seventh grade they moved to Kensal, you would be doing the same process. And so what may appear just on the surface to be, boy, we have a lot of movement happening, that isn't always the case. Sometimes it's the rules around where the student resides, the district in which they reside. So again, March 1st is the open enrollment. So if March 2nd somebody comes and says, I want to transfer from Montpelier, that this family example that we gave, they live in Jamestown, educated in another school. On March 2nd, if they decide, well, we want to change schools, we no longer want to go to Montpelier, now we want to go to Pingree, they would have to, because they missed that March 1st deadline, they would need to file a tuition agreement for the course of that next school year and then complete open enrollment. Now in our district, our internal processes, if they file a tuition agreement to us, we ask for an open enrollment at that same time. Now every district does it differently, and sometimes we're chasing down and getting open enrollment so they happen by March 1st. And sometimes we can't get a hold of those people and we don't get completed forms, so we do multiple tuition agreements. That's happened before also, where we asked for a tuition agreement to be completed, we don't get an open enrollment by the right time, or somebody else doesn't fill an open enrollment by the same time, so we're continually doing these tuition agreements. So those are all things that happen that kind of exacerbate the tuition agreement and open enrollment process. I gave a few examples in there. And if you have questions on that, maybe I'll break just for a second. Sometimes there's questions on these, and I don't want to, for anybody to not ask a question they might have on this, because I know they do float around quite often in terms of the questions on open enrollments and tuition agreements.
Any questions at this time? Or Diane?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch if they came in before March 1st, and the difference March 2nd is that they have to file an open enrollment. That's the difference.
So March 1st is the deadline for open enrollment. The open enrollment is the perpetual. I have to do it one time if I stay in the district. If they come March 2nd, they would have to complete a tuition agreement for the next school year. And the example that I used was a little more complicated because you have current year, next year, and then the preceding year. So you could, depending on your timeline, actually be filling out 3 different forms, 2 tuition agreements, because they're annual, current year, next year, and then an open enrollment for the following year, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Or? None? Okay.
And then the last thing I had is the budget hearing. At 6 o'clock, we'll break. We'll go in recess of this meeting, and then we'll go into our budget hearing. It is required by North Dakota Century Code. I cite it in here. It's 57-15-02.1. In the past, we have had that hearing regardless if we needed to or not. We just think it's been good practice. It's transparent. We want to provide that option and that opportunity for patrons to come and have that discussion with us about the budget. So we've done that regardless. We will, at the hearing, go through a little bit, and I know the board has been very educated on the zero mills calculations and all those things that we need to do, but we'll talk a little bit about that again. Just a reminder, that percentage, though, that comes in our ad, the percentage that goes out on our letter, that is not an increase of property tax. That's a calculation called the zero mills calculation. The only purpose of that calculation is to determine if you need to have a hearing or not. It is not a property tax increase percentage. And that's been very confusing. We know that that's going to change. We're going to have a universal tax hearing notice, a universal tax notice in the future, which negates the necessity to have those calculations done and those letters sent out. That'll all happen through the county auditor, and everybody will get that universal individualized notice, which will include that hearing notice as well. And then we will be required then to have it. We don't have to go through a calculation. You're just required to have one. When we get those as property owners, you get the letter. It says, this is your increase based on the county and the school, the park district. These are the hearings. You know, you have that opportunity to get all of that at one time instead of funneling through multiple different letters. But we'll do that at 6 o'clock. And I know there was also, Mr. Allen had asked a question before regarding safety and traffic safety, and maybe it'd be best to kind of address that, because I think it's a good question for the board, it's a good question for the public, and maybe we can address that here in this report too.
No, it was brought to me that there was some concern. I'm not sure how long ago, and I know some things have changed, but they said at the 3:20 hour out here, out in the middle school, that there's a lot of concern with kids coming out different doors and going in different directions. And I just wanted to see if you can give us an update on how that's going.
I think it's a great question, a very fair question. One of the things that came up, excuse me, for any of the board members that are part of the Citizens Advisory Committee recognize this also. We had a great discussion in terms of safety and security, specifically revolving around traffic. Not just at the middle school, but at all of our buildings, that we want to do the most that we can to provide traffic flow that provides a safe environment around all of our buildings. Due to its location, the middle school has historically been an area that has seen quite a bit of volume of traffic. And it's not just the school traffic, it's a lot about the location. And so, there's some things that we've done in the last few years to try to balance that out. We've moved where the buses come, so try to eliminate the bus from that traffic flow. Now everything loads and unloads in the east instead of partially in the west. And that's improved the flow. We've tried to send communications to our parents to say, dropping kids off on the west side of the street out in the front creates students having to walk back and forth. More recently, well, it's been an issue, but what we've dealt with more recently is the double parking. People stopping to unload and load students, which creates a greater issue of traffic flow. Now we're stopping on a through street, loading kids, which backs up more cars, which makes it harder to see. And so to help with that, there's two different things. The first is the more immediate. We have asked with our middle school administration to provide, they've always been visible out there, but to be a little bit more active in terms of getting that moving. Getting and to address the double parking. I know that communication was sent out via our school district app and emails requesting that people be mindful of traffic laws around the schools. Stopping on a through street, creates safety issues. And that was one step. We've also asked our school resource officer, he was down here every day for a couple of days at the beginning of the year to try to encourage folks to not do that and to push traffic along. And just like anything, the immediate response is very good, and then we start to move back into bad habits in terms of continuing to do that. And we have asked also for the school resource officer, the police department, to continue to think about us at that time of the day, that we aren't double parking in that area. So that's the short term. In the long term, if you remember some of the conversations we've had with the city in terms of planning for streets and how we can improve traffic flow long term through change in how we're designing and organizing the roadways. Lots of discussions were had. One ways. What would it look like if we did one ways? And some of those were not possible. But one of the things that we have looked at, and this was actually Chris Gibbs, our architect from DLR Group's suggestion, that if you look to the south, where we have diagonal parking on one side of the street, turn that into loading and unloading. That would be horizontal parking alongside instead of diagonal, and you could just load up there, which would provide a little bit of a relief from the traffic flow, and hopefully we could funnel more people to fill those spots instead of doing the double parking. Now, it does create a little bit of an issue in terms of staff parking, because staff park on that north side of Third, and so it would create some issues there in terms of parking, but we do have a lot straight to the east over here, and we do have the parking lot across from the church by the green space that isn't used as much, and that spot would need to be used more. But really, with the priority of safety, those are things that we can do. We can communicate all we want, but people need to follow those rules, and people need to choose to not double park and then use that spot as a loading unloading zone. We can only educate them so much before they have to choose to go that route, and we can involve the school resource officer, police department, but it ultimately comes down to behaviors. People need to recognize those are unsafe conditions, and that's something that we want to try to provide as many opportunities to correct as possible.
Okay, Heidi?
Along with that, how is the bus transition and track and Gusner going?
Thank you. It's a good question too. That's been moving along pretty well. I have not seen anything to the contrary of that, and that's always a good sign. But I think that's been very positive. I think we have been walking our students over in the morning from Gusner, and I think that's been working out okay also. Having some students walked back over at the end of the day from Gusner, and I think that's been positive also.
Heidi, a comment?
I actually had the same question. And then adding to that, do we have like snow removal plans and those kinds of things in place for the new location for the bus exchange?
We talked about that in the original. That's really all going to be handled through Parks and Rec, but we do have opportunities to work together, collaborate on that. So foresee that being something we can address pretty easily.
Any other questions for Rob, or? None? Okay. Moving on to board education, we have the ESG report. Patrick, would you like to come forward? Sweeter? Yeah. Didn't know if it was Sweeter.
It probably was sweeter at one point in history. I pronounce it Suter.
Okay, that's.
My name is Patrick Suter. I work for Honeywell Energy Services Group. I want to thank Superintendent Leck and the board members here for inviting me to provide an update on an annual basis for the Energy Guarantee Program here at Jamestown Public Schools. I'm going to share an update that includes a little historical perspective, a little background for the board. We started back in 2006, so really over a decade ago, to come up with a set of retrofits that would be self-funding so that the cost avoidance potential from the retrofit implementation would actually pay for the cost of doing the work. And that kind of a program Honeywell specializes in. We got through it, and by June 1st of 2008, it was completed, and it went into the guarantee phase. I'm the measurement and verification specialist assigned to this account. There's a lot of other people behind me and along with me that help verify the results are meeting the guarantee. So we have a 15-year energy guarantee of $4.34 million. That's the amount of cost avoidance that the school district should experience as a result of this investment. The actual original contract amount was about $2.9 million, but there's ongoing costs related to the services provided to verify the results. That originally was quite ambitious, like almost 35,000 plus. Subsequently, it was reduced. We removed a pretty large chunk of preventive maintenance activities that are still necessary, but not through this program. And then we amended it a second time to reduce the lighting guarantee, so we no longer provide lamps and ballasts for failed installation under the lighting piece. And as a result, now, beginning in year 10, we're about a third of that original amount on an ongoing basis. So you're more than covering your original costs, and now you are reducing the costs of the methodology to evaluate it. And so the district benefits on both sides of that scale. And so what did you buy for this investment? The project details on the right-hand side of this 4-blocker are the improvements that were made. A substantial amount went to automation system, an Andover control system that allows the district to implement some of the control strategies that help save money. And from our data, you're doing an excellent job of utilizing that equipment. The others I've listed here, it's kind of nice to know how much went into what, but this is all 10 years ago. So some of these original installations would be good candidates for further scrutiny. But how did we do in year 9? Lower left-hand corner, this is from the year 9 annual report, copies of which have been delivered to the school. And so as of May 31st, 2017, we have verified $311,000 of cost avoidance. That's against a guarantee of $286,000. So this is a very successful program as far as we can determine from the measurements that we make. On the rest of the pages here that I go through, I want to share with you what we're seeing from the year 9 report. I call it a snapshot. Then I'll show the board the historical results on the energy only from the time of the project beginning through year 9. Lastly, the historical total results, which include an O&M cost avoidance portion. Page 3 shows you this snapshot, and I better forward my slide. This is a document that I apologize. This is not in the packet, so whatever I did, I failed to include it in this version, but I will back up momentarily. So I'm going to leave it there, but I'll walk you through what I'm looking at on the energy summary tab of the official report. We have the retrofits on the left side, the sources of utility savings and water savings across the top. And each of those unit values are determined by engineering calculations and then tabulated at a rate that is not necessarily your actual utility rate, it's a contract rate. So there are some opportunities to save more or less depending on how much you're actually paying for the various utilities. But to make the cash flow work for the lending institutions, we lock that down at the beginning of the project. The biggest contributor to both of the energy electrical savings and the gas and fuel savings is the energy management piece, which is what Honeywell measures directly. So we use data collected from that automation system. We feed it back into the original engineering calcs, and we have high confidence that based on those measurements, the performance we're reporting is realistic. Lower left-hand corner, we convert all that to dollars. This is a very big program. We're looking at annual guaranteed savings of $286,000. The operational piece is a small amount, less than about 20%. So the bulk of the savings are real utility savings, and that's a good news for the district. That money spends very well. And in the case of the O&M savings, those are legitimate too, but those also may or may not have been retained on the budget for the school district for the entire 15-year guarantee period. So I'm jumping to the results. All right. The energy results over the time that we've been tracking this program have always been favorable. I'm looking for any exceptions to that. I don't see any. So each year, we more than made the guarantee, and over the 9-year program term so far, we've verified $2.1 million of cost avoidance to Jamestown Public Schools versus the guarantee amount of 1.9, which is more than enough to cover the debt retirement and other costs associated with the guarantee. On the total amount, which it blends in the operational savings, we see in through year 9, 2.5, almost $2.6 million versus $2.3 million guaranteed. So from Honeywell's perspective, we see a very favorable project that's persistent in its savings potential, and that's credit to the partnership that we have with the school. One of the things I would point out on page 6 is that we do more than just collect data and plug it back into the engineering calcs to estimate the savings potential. We provide feedback to the school through the ops team, and some of the things that we do is periodically log into the system and check for anomalies, and I included a sample of some of the findings from one of the recent operational review reports. That's just to let you know that we not only want you to succeed, but we look for ways to help beyond the basic economic performance. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Suter or Rob? Yeah.
I'm just going to add a comment. One of the things that I find particularly valuable in the times that we get to, we meet quarterly. Quarterly?
Yes. Well, quarterly reports.
Quarterly reports and then annual visits. But one of the things that is particularly valuable that you don't see here is the spreadsheets that we receive from ESG, the reporting. So as an example, something that we might get, because they've broken down all of our systems, we might get a report that says, well, hold on a second, there's something getting flagged here. You have an air handling unit that's running 100% more than what we are targeting that it should be running. Why is that the case? And so then we have a chance to, through our maintenance department, say, well, what's happening with air handler unit number 2 in the middle school gym? You know, why is that running more than it should be running? And we have a chance to look, okay, it's circumstantial. You know, we're doing it for this reason, or this has been changed, so that's why we're doing it. And it might be, well, that unit's not running properly. So then we have a different issue, and if we don't have these annual visits and these quarterly reports, those are not things that we get. A lot of times what we see are user things. Well, we're running our, we set our air conditioning unit to run because it was really hot. Well, now it's running 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. Well, that's not what we want. And so some of it is just changes that get made that don't get fixed. And again, without the constant quarterly reports, those are things that get missed. We don't know at central office. Jerome doesn't know through maintenance that these things happen. And it's just a way that we're, accountable for that energy usage. And it helps us greatly to get those reports.
Thank you for the words. It is good to have a cross-check, and there's no school district that has enough time to do all that along with the day-to-day activities. So one of the things that we like to do is make that as easy and visible as possible. So your words are welcome, and I appreciate them.
It's usually very easy to see where we're off, and they're red numbers, and they're, they come out at you and they say, well, we have, and like I said, some of them are known things, and some of them are things that we've said, well, because we want to run our program this way, this is how we're going to do things, and we recognize that that's going to cost differently because it's whatever it depends on what the issue is, but there's choices that we make, and then there's the other things that happen, and that help us target the things that we don't realize, and the mechanical breakdowns and those kinds of things.
Okay. Any other questions or nothing? Nope. Steve?
Maybe this isn't for Patrick, but what happens after year 15? Do we enter into another contract, or?
I can respond to that. We would more than welcome an opportunity to explore future potential, especially this is a very mature program. Lighting technology has advanced significantly in the last 10 years, so almost every location would benefit from a revisitation of the lighting piece. Building envelope was not part of the original scope of work, so there'd be another opportunity to look for cost savings that typically have a real competitive payback. I know that there's a steam boiler issue here. A lot of schools can justify converting the steam systems to hot water and make that pay off on a reasonable timeline. So with that in mind, I would advise you to consider allowing Honeywell or others to see what other potential exists for Jamestown schools. It's a great question.
Okay. Any other questions for him? None? Thanks for the information. Thanks for the report. So.
Thank you.
Moving on to number 2, we have in Board Education, open meeting and open records. Rob?
Well, thank you. I did talk about this a little bit in my superintendent's report, providing 3 different Attorney General opinions. And just so you know, and I did kind of go through a descriptor notation on here. When you're looking at AG opinions, 2007 obviously is the year in which the request was made to review. The O stands for open records. They have different requests that they make for reviews, and 14 is the number of the issue. It was the 14th request to consider an open records violation. So 2007-04-14, that was the example of the Mandan City Commission. AG opinion 2014-012 was Mott Regent School District, and then more recently 2017-04 or 004 was Cass County Commission. And just to reiterate, when we look through these, there's a lot of AG opinions that get requested each year in open records and open meetings. And like I said, normally I don't understand the process issues. They aren't egregious, purposeful attempts to circumvent open meeting, open records. So generally, when you see those in the paper, it's stuff like this. I think the 3 examples the reasons I picked them. One of the reasons I picked them is because they all deal with electronic means. We send out a lot of information electronically, and I thought that was important. But beyond that, they're really generally pretty, in one instance of the Mott Region School District, really a minor issue. Even the Attorney General if you read all of the opinion, even suggest, boy, this isn't really a big issue, but it is an open meeting violation. Or an open records violation. And I thought they all were pertinent to us as a board, plus how we operate. So I noted in my report, and I'll just kind of talk about these takeaways and then maybe just open it up for a greater discussion, because I think there will be good discussion in terms of, or there's potential for good discussion here. But I think some of the key takeaways, in particular from the first 2, which I thought were very similar, Mandan City Commission and the Mott Region School District. And these, I think, are things that should be reviewed and people know. Key takeaway number 1, it's okay to send out information via electronic means. I think there are a lot of questions on that early in email, and as schools and other entities started to move into electronic board meetings rather than the big paper binders. And for those of you that never got to experience the big paper binders, you really were missing out because you would have stacks and stacks of binders. But as we move to a more efficient means, that question came up, is electronic means, can we communicate electronically? Absolutely you can. They're all subject to open meeting. They're all subject to open records. So that's why we have emails through at your K-12 districts. That's why you're required to keep, as we talk about in orientation and other times where you're required to keep all of those emails that are sent because they are subject. And if we were to have an open records request, you'd need to produce those. So the state only can track so much of that, and it comes down to us. And the general rule, as we've always told you, don't delete emails that are about school board business. You keep them in a folder. Don't delete them. So every email that I've sent to a board member or received from a board member since I've been here is in a folder. That is school board. And even when there are questions from Bob asking if I paid you sold me a ticket, which I still haven't paid you for, by the way. Hey, as a reminder, you still owe me the $25 for your ticket. Even those I save, even though it has nothing to do with school. But if it's from a board member, then I keep it. I think that's a good general rule to keep, and I'll get that money to you too. Key takeaway number 2, meetings can be formal or informal. I think this is an important one. Sometimes we think of a meeting as a formal meeting. We called a meeting, or there was 2 or 3 board members assigned by the board to a committee. Those are meetings, and we think of them that way. But you can have informal meetings. And so this is kind of where a lot of these AG opinions come down to. It's the informal meetings, not the formal meetings. It's the informal meetings. And I think they do a pretty good job of defining those informal meetings. So you can have a quorum of the board. Well, that's pretty obvious. When you have a quorum of the board doing board business, you're having a formal meeting. But they also talk about if you're doing board business in one or smaller groups, less than a quorum, but you're doing it to avoid open meeting requirements. That's also a open meeting violation. So key takeaway number 3, email can be used to inform. What they call it, and what the Attorney General calls it in the opinions, is ministerial use. They use that in pretty frequently. So what that means is you can request agenda items. You can ask for clarification on an agenda item. You can send out information on when should we have the special board meeting. All of that's ministerial. Okay, they're still subject to open records, but you're allowed to use email for that purpose. It is not a violation of open meetings. What you can't do, though, is use it to build support and consensus. And you saw that in the Cass County, and I think in the Mandan City Commission also, where you're seeing, even if it's not purposeful, you're building consensus. All of that, as the Attorney General rightfully points out, needs to happen in open session. If you're making a decision, the discussion should happen at the table also. So that's, I think, pretty common sense, but it is one of the things that they talk about. And then the other item that was, I can't remember which one this one, I think this was from Mott Regent. If you're receiving emails, don't respond to all. And you'll notice that in the emails that I send to you, say, hey, here's a reminder, don't reply to all. That's because it could potentially violate open records, open meetings, because you're then potentially building consensus or support around an item. So it's okay to ask for clarification to the sender. You can ask a question. So if I send you an email and you don't understand something or want clarification, it's okay to call me. It's okay to send me an email back that says, please expound on this point I don't understand. But don't do it to all. Okay? And that's one of the reasons why, because you'd violate open meeting. So if we look at the Cass County Commission, one of the takeaways there was notice. So if you're having an emergency meeting, a special meeting, the steps that they outline are pretty important. You have to notice the official paper, you need to include date, time, location. If you're going to expect executive session, you have to note that explicitly. And then your discussion can only be limited to what's on the agenda. Those are things we talk about. We recognize those things. One of the things that is almost a myth out there is that you're required to have a 24-hour notice for a special board meeting. You hear this a lot and say, well, you have to have that. That's not codified. You don't have to have 24 hours. You have to do the steps that I just outlined, 1 through 4. That's what you need to do. But you don't have, and it's best practice to have as much time as possible to have a special meeting. If you don't have to have one until you can give 24, 48, 72 hours notice, that's best. But sometimes, they call it a special emergency meeting for a reason. Sometimes you don't have the opportunity to do that. And then the other point that got made up in this, in the Cass County Commission's AG opinion, was the level of detail that needs to happen in the agenda. So your agenda, by the AG's interpretation, doesn't need to provide every step of discussion, but it needs to have enough so the public looking at an agenda can figure out what's supposed to happen, what you're talking about, and what your potential actions are. So you shouldn't be so vague that nobody has any idea what you're actually going to be talking about. But you aren't required to outline every step of a 15-step issue. You have to provide enough detail that people understand reasonably what's happening at your meeting. So with that, I would open up to any questions or discussion that you want to have before we move into that budget hearing.
Yep. Any questions on the open meetings? Greg?
I just had one question, and it had to do with responding to constituents. If they email you on, our email here with the K-12, and then we respond to that, all of that information is considered public information and can be called out for.
Yes, that would be subject to open records. And you would just want to be sure, just like every other correspondence, that you keep record of it.
One question, Rob, on those emails, is there any statute of how many years back a person has to hold those?
I guess I would need to look into that, but I would say the safe response is just to keep everything. In the events you have any questions ever arise about a communication, you'd much rather be able to say, I kept it, and here it is, than, no, I deleted them after so much time. Even if a statute or practice would allow you to do that, the state provides, ample space through the K-12 addresses that you have to keep and store all of that information, so I don't know why you would want to, but I could look into see the specifics of it.
Okay. Any other questions? Steve?
When we talked about the bus exchange and traffic flow, without that being on the agenda, are we getting down to where that's a problem?
That's a great question, and no, it's part of a report. I'm sharing that out as a report. That was not an action item, it's informational. So that's part of what we would consider the reporting of the superintendent. I brought it up because it was a timely issue. Even though it wasn't written in the report, I could have just brought it up as information. Now, if I was asking you to approve as a board a new safety plan or new traffic plan or something along those lines, that would be problematic because it wasn't on our agenda. We would have to have a process to add it to the agenda, which we didn't do. So if I was asking you to take action, it's probably the simplest way to explain that.
Diane?
I've always been a tad confused on if I run into a board member, a current board member, at the grocery store and want to ask a question. Is there an ethical issue with that we would be speaking in the aisle of the grocery store one-on-one about something that came up at a meeting?
It's a little bit of a difficult question because there's a lot of different contexts and variables to that question. It is fine as a member of the board to have a conversation about decisions that were made. Not okay to have a conversation about something that could be building consensus or building towards a decision. That's where it gets a little bit stickier. But the other component of that is you have to remember that as a board member, when you're in public, the perception, people know that you're a board member. The perception of two board members huddling and having a discussion about a school item is going to appear as if it's building consensus. And you have to be careful of the perception that's given in those situations. But as a general rule, I think the general rule that's easiest to follow is if there is action that's going to be taken, the discussion should take place at the board table also. You know, that as a general rule is kind of a good way to follow. It is not disallow, you can have a private conversation, and if that person so happens to be a board member, that's okay. You just have to be able to make the differentiation between what is leading to board action and what is not. You might be asking another board member a question and saying, I didn't understand this recommendation. That's okay. The other thing is if you're unsure, call me and ask me those questions also. And, you know, that could help out with that process also. But so I don't know if I did a great job of answering your question, but that's a little stickier. It might be one of those case-by-case situations where it could differ based on what you're talking about.
I think it was particularly helpful to say if there's pending action, don't discuss. If it's something in the past, in the history of our board meetings, you know, be cautious, but you can discuss.
And we know too, if they are personnel issues, those are always something that, because you would be the hearing officers, that you need to be able to take a step back from. Does that happen? You don't want to get into a situation where the board as a hearing officer is biased towards a situation. You are required to provide impartiality. So you'd have to be able to take a step back from those communications.
Okay. It's a little after 6, so what we'll do is to put our meeting into recess and start our budget hearing on the property tax request. So Rob, you want to just go over that a little bit? And
Sure, as I've done in the past, and for those guests that have come, there is a packet back there of information. That includes what I've labeled as Board Memo 30, and then a number of different attachments that the board has electronically that as I reference them, if you want to look, please feel free to do so. So this public hearing is required based on Century Code 57-15-02.1. As the board has been aware, we've talked about this before, we're required to have this hearing because of a calculation called a zero mills calculation. That calculation is a comparison from mills levied last year to mills levied proposed in the present year, excluding construction and new land growth. So it's a little bit of a confusing thing, and that's one of the reasons why that law has been changed, and we won't be required to calculate that particular percentage anymore because it's confusing. People assume that number that's listed in the paper is the percentage that their taxes are going to go up. And so it's confusing for that reason, and that's moving forward will be changed. We do want the process to be as transparent as possible. But the memo includes an approximate breakdown of the impact also on an individual property owner. But I want to talk a little bit about the approval process. The board has approved, and that's been communicated through the media and other venues that we provide through our minutes for a preliminary budget. We do have We do meet the criteria to have a budget hearing, as we talked about earlier in this meeting. Even when we haven't had the requirement to have a meeting, we choose to, because it makes sense to us and it makes sense to talk and communicate to the public on what the budget approval process is and what the ask is locally. So we've done that even when we are not required to do so. There is another reference to Century Code, and that's in the packet also. It's 57-12-09, and that is the hearing notice and a letter to each property owner that meets certain criteria. One of the things that we do is post an ad. And if you look at that ad, it provides, if you look in the corner that says important notice to Jamestown Public School taxpayers, that's what we're required to do by law. And it's actually really pretty prescribed. That font, that size, all of that is prescribed in law, again, which will change now with the law change. But that's what we're required to do. We choose to do a little bit more than that because we think it helps people understand what the ask is and give people the information that generally we believe that they ask for. Mills, percentages, all of that matter to people, but what really matters is, well, how does it impact me? And so we wanted to make sure that in the projected property tax impact, that's outlined in there. The ask from 2016 to the projected ask is provided, and the difference between that in this year as compared to last year's $19.40 annually on a $100,000 home. We also provide information on fall enrollment from 2008 to present, the total mill value from 2008 to present, and then the value of our mill from 2008 to present. Lastly, we include in that ad the percentage of revenue that we receive local, state, and federal, and then our program expenditures for 2016 and to then the projected for 17-18. So that is the ad that we provide, and again, the reason we do that, we're required to provide the one. We think it helps people understand what the ask is for the remainder of the information. Hold on. So, what are the expectations for the meeting? By this budget hearing requirements, while it isn't a question and answer session, it is an opportunity for patrons, if they so desire, to come before the board and share information related to what our budget request is. And if when we get to that point, you can invite anybody to come and speak, and they would come up to the podium and share thoughts that they had. Before we did that, I wanted to walk through again that just a little bit of information. I've talked already about the zero mill percentage increase. That's at 7.59%. That's in the ad. It doesn't represent an individual property tax increase to that percentage. So the requirements in law make that somewhat misleading, but it is a comparison between mills levied last year, mills proposed this year, minus construction and new land growth. And again, it's mills, it's not in dollars. So again, in Jamestown, a home with a value of $100,000, school portion of the taxes, previous year was $426.15. The estimated school portion of property tax with that same value home, $100,000 for the current levy request is $445.55, the difference being the $19.40 that's listed in the ad. Now, it is important that we recognize this doesn't have any impact on reassessment. So we're talking about an apple-to-apple comparison between one year and the next. If a home increased in value was reassessed, that's not under the control of the district. But if that home was valued at $100,000 last year and is valued at $115,000 this year, this isn't that comparison. We're talking about a simple comparison between a $100,000 home last year, a $100,000 home this year. So that gets the difference of the $19.40. I think it's important too, and I think the ad does a good job of this in looking at the historical mill levy also. if you can look, and we've talked about this as a board previous, but the caps for the levy authority for school districts has changed significantly in the last 15 years. It used to be 185 mills in a general fund, and that was changed to 110. That was then changed to 60 plus the 10 board discretionary, so a total of 70 in really a few different legislative sessions. So that's changed significantly, and in the memo, it shows the difference in what's actually been requested in 2008, 2009, and what would be requested more recently. So you can see the difference in terms of that ask. The last thing that I think is really important to understand is the funding formula, and I provided the worksheet that we use, and I'm not going to talk about this in depth unless there's questions. I'd certainly be willing to do that. But in terms of our funding formula, the biggest thing, the biggest takeaways are our funding formulas used to be property-centric, and now they're student-centric. When we had a greater number of mills to levy, it mattered how much land you had. A wealthy school district had a large school district and or in lieu of tax revenue. Both of that's changed in the new funding formula, which is, again, is student-centric. So it used to be you got, when I first became a superintendent, I think the state aid payment was around $2,800 per student. Well, it's now $96.46 a student. And that shift has changed dramatically as the state has taken on more, levy authority has gone down. Okay, and that's why you see the difference in terms of mills requested. So, but the other thing that does, what this formula does is it tries to create greater equity among school districts so you don't have winners and losers. It tries to take all of those factors and power equalize them. And so when you see that 96-46, you can't just take 96-46 times the number of students you have. That's not how the formula works. That's how the formulas used to work in the past, but that's not how they work now. What you need to do, the value, if you look at line 26, the total formula payment, that $23,311, that, or $311,000, that is the total weighted student units, 2416, that's in line 24. And for those that are watching on line 2, these are available. It would be available on our website, or they would be available. Contact me, and you can certainly walk you through them also. But 241666 are our weighted student units. That's our number of students plus other program membership. We get additional weights depending on if a student is in alternative education, if they're an English language learner, special education, all of those things. So you have your weighted ADM, that's your total, or your average daily membership, your total number of students, and then you get these other factors. So you come up to this number. For us, it's 241666. Again, that's line 24. You take that times the 9646, which is the state payment, and you get to that $23,311,000. But like I said, that's not what the school district receives. And this is where the power equalization comes in, where they do formula adjustments. You can call them deductions, you can call them formula adjustments, but the purpose of them is equity, to provide equity to school districts, not taxpayer equity, but equity to school districts. And so if you go onto page 2, there's section B, contribution from other local revenue, and section C, contribution from property tax. If you look at section B, contribution from other local revenue, that's tuition that we might receive to educate students. It's county revenue, that could be things like coal conversion, oil and gas, tax revenue, U.S. flood, electric generation, mobile home, and other in lieu taxes, telecom. So you throw those together, and if you look in the next column over, it's percent. That's percent of that of what you receive in revenue that's deducted. So what the formula is trying to do is to try and make sure that there are not winners and losers. And if one school is receiving a great amount of revenue in, say, oil and gas, 75% of that is deducted away from them, to power equalize. So for us, the in lieu of really isn't that much comparative. It's $426, but it goes up every year. And the contribution for property tax, as I said, in the past, it was very land-centric. It was property-centric. And that certainly changed in this formula. If you look at the contribution for property tax, if you would take your last year's taxable value and deduct the value of 60 mills. Then when you consider our general fund is able to levy a maximum of 70 mills, we're getting deducted the value of 60 mills. Now, legislators don't like when we talk about this, but I'd consider those 60 mills to be a state levy because we get deducted on the value of 60 mills. So if you go back now up into the adjustments, the formula adjustments, you can see those same numbers are deducted from our foundation aid payments in line 30 and line 31, and that gets us to an actual amount. So that 23 million number, what the formula is really trying to do is tell us a number of what the cost is to educate a student, inclusive of state revenue, inclusive of a local request. That's why they deduct 60 mills. That's why they deduct the in lieu of. So that's the money we actually get, the 19 million. So why is that important? Well, it's important when you consider, as has happened in this year, as will happen next year, that number in line 25, the per student payment rate, that 96.46 is the same. The district does not receive additional dollars. 96.46 was our amount last year. It's our amount this year. It's going to be our amount next year. But sometimes when we see those things, we think, oh, that's hold harmless. That's a freeze. Well, in our formula, it's not a freeze. It means that if you have the same number of students, your payment from the state actually goes down. And the way the formula works is you request then more locally. That's how the formula is set to work because it equalizes. So that's the issue because, as I said, Section B, contribution from other local revenue, that goes up every year. Contribution from property tax goes up every year. So if your amount that you receive stays the same, or the formula payment stays the same, but your deductions, the adjustments increase, your net is less. So just to maintain what you're asking, what you received last year, the difference gets made up locally. That's how the formula is set to work. We don't have to like how the formula is set to work, but that's how it works. And I think it's important that we recognize that 96.46 being frozen does not mean that the school district receives the same amount. Now, a school district could lose more than that because it's student-centric, you could actually lose more than that. And the flip side, if you gain students, you could actually gain more than that. The way the formula is set, the winners and losers are always going to be school districts that are growing, because 96.46 is what you receive per student. And again, that's inclusive of state revenue, inclusive of local revenue, but that is the number one driver is that. So the impact of enrollment in the present funding system, like I said, we actually see a decrease, and I think that's important that we recognize. The district has been working diligently over the last few years to right-size, or what I call right-size our budget. The variables of frozen per pupil amounts and actual decrease in the revenue we receive from the state makes that challenging, but I think we've done a good job. Salary and benefits, obviously the largest portion as it would be in any organization. Slight dip in enrollment from last year in our last spring ADM, which is what this is based on, coupled with the state revenue freeze and natural increases to a budget, inflation, salary benefit costs, can't be overcome just with state revenue. This does result in a shift slightly from state to local revenue. This is a challenge that all school districts in the state of North Dakota are seeing also. In our budget deficit, our ending fund balance, I know that's been an issue the board has been looking at and considering over the last couple of years. And, we have done a really comprehensive examination of the budget. And even with the difficulties with declining enrollment, a student-centric formula, freeze to state aid, I think we're positioned well. Even though we are projecting a deficit of $178,000 in our $29 million budget, I think that's reasonable. And I don't think that's an insurmountable deficit, and that with a diligent budget management, we can get close to a balanced budget by the end of the fiscal year. If we are, continue to stay committed to cost savings, I think we should be okay. The other point that I want to make, there are future concerns with the district levy's request of 69.01 mils in the general fund. As you all know, that's a cap. There's a cap of 70. So that means that although we will see a greater decrease without an enrollment growth anyway, a greater decrease in state revenue, that's very little wiggle room that remains between 69 and 70 mils, and that is the difference that you have, and you're going to be capped. We'll be capped as a district at 70. So that is not a favorable place to be, but it is what we have, and we will work within it. But there's very little room left to mitigate that second year of capped state revenue. So we're going to continue to, Sally and I will continue to look for more efficiencies and cost savings, and we'll continue to manage our budget well so we can continue to position ourselves well in that area. My recommended action will be to approve the final budget that Sally will go over, and then the corresponding certificate of levy. But with that, my comments are done, and Mr. Hout, I'd recommend that you open it up to the floor if there are any comments.
Is there any comments from the audience on the budget hearing? Mr. Closey, you want to come up and state your name for the board? And
Richard Closey. Is this on? Yes. Richard Closey, 8170 41st Street Southeast. Brought some good points. The whole purpose of the school, no, I'm pointing at you, sir, is to educate our children. And you're running on a very tight budget. And I agree with you 100%. Our purpose as a taxpayer is to give money to the school district, to educate our children, to pay our teachers, which I have no problem with. My big problem is sports. Why should I be paying tax money to fund the sports? And how much of our tax money is going for sports? And how much is the school district paying for our sports? Pretty quiet.
Just for clarification, this is your opportunity to share with the board. It's not question and answer.
Oh, okay, I apologize. So that's my point right there, is I don't see my tax money being wasted on sports. I know numerous people who don't even live in the area their money's being spent on sports. Like I said, no problem educating. And you look at the percentage of the kids in the school district who are involved in sports, and then you look at the amount of parents, or I should say taxpayers, the amount of taxpayers who are paying on taxes, how many go to the sports events, get anything out of the sports events? That's my point. I don't have a problem paying taxes for education, fine and dandy. Paying teachers, excellent. Sports, parents want kids in sports, they can dish it out of their own pocket. They can pay for it. Thank you.
okay, thanks, Richard. Any other comments or none? Any more comments in the hearing or none? Okay, we'll close the hearing and go back into our regular meeting. Under old business, is there any old business? Moving into new business, and we have nothing under activities or buildings or grounds, curriculum. Is there a motion to approve the financial budget, final budget? Rob?
And Sally has the executive summary that she's provided, and we'll go over briefly if there are And a lot of this is what you've heard in the preliminary budget process also. But if there's any clarification beyond what she's provided in that executive summary, just ask, and we can go through as much as you feel is pertinent.
Sally?
As Rob said, I have the executive summary, and in July, I presented you with draft budgets of all the funds. And so, in the drive, you have final budgets of all the funds. Obviously, general fund, has changed since we, did the agreement with the teachers, administrators, salaries. So this is the final, final budget for the general fund. A deficit of 178,679.53. Given where we started and what we started with, I think this is, like Rob said, and everyone in the district knows that there's a lot of no's. So, and you see the detail, and I won't go, if you want me to, you tell me what you want. I mean, I can go through each and every one or answer any questions. You tell me where you want to go from here.
Does anybody have any questions on the executive summary, or
Do you want me to go over
Jennifer?
executives?
No questions, but it's evident across the board that we're trying to buckle down and we're trying to strap everything in that we possibly can, but continue to provide quality education. And thank you, Sally, for leading us, and Rob, and all of the administrators and the teachers. I know it's hard to hear no, because we have some really innovative staff that want to do some really great and amazing things, and know that good times will come again, but right now it's just strapping it in, and I appreciate everything that you're doing so that taxpayers can know that they're getting a good education to their students.
Thanks, Jennifer. Any other comments or questions for Sally? No? There a motion to approve the final budget? Motion by Jennifer, seconded by Greg. Any discussion? Hearing none, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving to letter C, is there a motion to approve the final certificate of levy? Motion by Bob, seconded by Brenda. Any discussion? Hearing none, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We have nothing under personnel. Moving to number 6 is policy and procedures. Is there a motion to approve the second readings A through D? Motion by Jennifer, seconded by Steve. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving to letter E, is there a motion to approve the first reading of the whistleblower protection policy, ACF? Motion by Bob, seconded by Diane. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving to letter F, is there a motion to approve the first reading of the Jamestown Public School District Policy Acknowledgement Form, BDA-E? Motion by Brenda, seconded by Cedric. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say, you have a question? No. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Rob?
If I can just add a comment before we get into some of the leave policies that are first readings. I had a good question earlier. Some of the policy changes, and I apologize, I should have put this in my report, but with some of the leave policy changes, the question was, in the past we differentiated between our certified staff and non-certified staff in policy, and now in this new policy we aren't doing that, and why is that? I think it's a great question. The reason is that one of the things that was cleaned up in terms of our policies, we go through the School Boards Association and through a legal counsel, we already provide for certified staff. That's already in the negotiated agreement, and it's redundant to do it twice. You don't need to do it in policy when you've done it already in the negotiated agreement. And our old policies were redundant. It stated in policy what was already provided in the negotiated agreement. You only have to do it one place or the other. And so that cleaned up the language. So the references are to support staff, those that are not governed by a master contract or a negotiated agreement. So that's the difference in some of these policies, if that question comes up for you. So I wanted to be clear when you're approving those policies, or when you're considering, I should say, those policies, that you recognize that's the difference for the leave policies. They don't need to be, contracted staff don't need to be in policy because it's already in the negotiated agreement. But the other staff, we did include them because they aren't bound by an agreement.
Moving to letter G, is there a motion to rescind the funeral leave policy, DDBC? Motion by Brenda, seconded by Greg. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving to letter H, is there a motion to approve the first reading of the bereavement leave policy, DDBC? Motion by Jennifer, seconded by Brenda. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving to letter I, is there a motion to rescind the dismissal policy, DKB? Motion by Bob, seconded by Steve. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving to letter J, is there a motion to the review separation of at-will employees policy, DCBA? Motion by Jennifer, seconded by Cedric. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving to letter K, is there a motion to approve the first reading of amended vacation policy, DDBA? Motion by Greg, seconded by Brenda. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving to letter L, is there a motion for the first reading of the contract staff resignation and request for release for contract policy, DKBB? Motion by Cedric, seconded by Brenda. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving to number 7, handbooks. Is there a motion to approve the non-teaching, support staff, and the talented and gifted handbooks? Motion by Jennifer, seconded by Bob. Any discussion on them? Jennifer?
I did notice some changes. Were those mainly recommendations from like NSB, or where were those, where were those, I mean, they seemed minute, but there were changes. I was just curious where the recommendations came from.
Either that or from legal counsel. It really depends on what particular point, but between those two, a lot of it was clarifying matching handbooks to policy or matching handbook to practice.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving to tuition, is there a motion to approve 2 9th grade students to attend Montpelier Public School for the 2017-18 school year? Motion by Brenda, seconded by Heidi. Any discussion? Hearing none. Assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. There a motion to approve the tuition agreement for a pre-K kindergarten and a 4th grade student to attend Kensal Public School for the 2017-18 school year. Motion by Cedric, seconded by Steve. Any discussion? Hearing none. Assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. There a motion to approve the 11th grade student to attend Barnes County North for the 2017-18 school year. Motion by Jennifer, seconded by Diane. Any discussion? Hearing none. Assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Any items for future agenda? I think we had some the last meeting that we gave you, so if there is something that comes up, just let myself or Rob know, and we'll get them on the agenda. Meetings to be scheduled, we have the Health Insurance Committee meeting on Monday, October 9th at 3:30 in the multipurpose room. We have our next school board meeting on Monday, October 16th, 5:15 here in the Thompson room. And we also have the North Dakota School Board Convention coming up October 26th and 27th in Bismarck. And then I'd just like to remind everybody to do the monthly superintendent evaluation. Heidi?
Just wondering if you want to do another reminder for our schedule change for Wednesday with the early dismissal.
Okay.
Sure. Actually, at about 6:30, patrons around and many board members I saw around the table received a notice from me, a communication that we did send out a call today to remind people that our early dismissal on Wednesday. So we'll be dismissing 2 hours early. Purpose of those professional development for teachers. So that will be this Wednesday. And then we have one coming up in December, one in March, and then one in May also. So.
I have one comment. We did not ask for delegates for the convention, so I need to know who the delegate and alternate delegate.
Okay, as far as delegates, Brenda, you want? Cedric, you're going to be there? Or? Cedric? And how many do we need?
We need
5?
five.
Myself? Bob, you?
Is that 5 with the alternate though, right? Is that 5 with the alternate?
2, 3. Jennifer, you're going to be there too? Okay. Diane, you're? I think you just put 5 down and, yeah. That would be the easiest way.
All right, thank you.
Oh. And then also another reminder to right-click on your adjournment to assess our meeting, and no further business, meeting's adjourned.